Welcome to episode 80 of the Geekly. Episode 80, wow. Today we're doing Westworld, the film from 1973. We're doing the latest episode of the Westworld TV show. And we're also doing season 1 of a new Netflix TV show called Vampires.
Let's start with the Westworld film.
Do you find it weird that in 3 years' time that film is going to be 50 years old?
Jesus, that is... Like, I still haven't gotten used to the fact that, like, the 70s, I still think of them as, like, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was, like, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing watching films from the 70s, and as I was watching it, I kept saying, like, I kept reminding myself, you know, this is from the 70s. They weren't super imaginative back then. We're more sophisticated audiences. Like Ford, we keep striving for more and more realistic film experiences. But then I thought, you know what? Star Wars came out in like 77, like 4 years after this. And you look at that, and you look at this, and it just kind of feels like with this film they didn't try very hard.
I find it funny that this film came out in 1973, and they thought, what year should we set it in? What futuristic year do these events take place? And it's set in 1983. Yeah, I mean, what did you think of the film?
Okay, so I started watching it in the afternoon, and I got about 40 minutes into it, and I fell asleep. No character development, no plot arc, no real world building. Most of the characters didn't even have names.
Yeah.
They were just, like, there. The two guys in Westworld, they weren't overly interesting. There were some kind of half-assed attempts at backstory. We knew the one guy was divorced, and he had kids, but he was still in love with his ex-wife, who apparently was kind of a shit person. We had this weird storyline going on in medieval world that was like totally disconnected from Westworld and didn't really seem to serve any purpose at all. We never found out that guy's name or learned anything about him, just he was in medieval world and he got killed by the Black Knight. There's 20 minutes left in the film, and I was just like, how are they going to resolve this? Like, we've had no character arc, no plot arc, no conflict, no antagonist, just nothing. Like, is it just gonna like stop in 20 more minutes? Like, what's gonna happen? And that is essentially what happened.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah, it didn't really feel like a film because, like you said, there was absolutely zero. I don't know if you did say it, but there was absolutely zero conflict. It wasn't like a documentary. It was more like two people going to Westworld to review the experience for like their YouTube channel. It was like they'd gone there armed with a couple of GoPros, and they were just experiencing some of the delights that the world had to offer. The film is like 82 minutes long. I swear for the first 55, 60 minutes of this film, that was all it was. There was no conflict to speak of. These two men, they arrived, and their arrival took forever. That must have been the first 15 minutes of the film at least. They got on this little shuttle bus. That felt like it took 5 minutes.
Forever.
Yeah. And
they were on that shuttle bus forever.
And then you got to this section where they had all the, the Wild West clothes for them to pick. They were there getting dressed in like almost in real time. They went to a bar, got whiskey. One of them killed a robot. They went to a brothel. The next morning, the same guy killed the same robot who seemed to be kind of tracking him down as this like almost having a vendetta. The guy went to jail for it, and his friend freed him from the jail. And then the robots, that's when the uprising kind of happened. And the last 20 minutes was one robot pursuing one man through like a deserted Westworld.
You mentioned that it seemed like a YouTube review of the park, and that was kind of, I mean, I didn't think specifically YouTube, but I did think, like, this is basically just an ad for Westworld.
Yeah.
Like, these are the things you can do at Westworld. Or maybe like somebody's family vacation video, like, oh, this is what we did on our trip.
Yeah.
That like nobody wants to actually watch. The uprising as well didn't really have much setup. Every once in a while, the people at Delos would just be like, "Huh, this robot malfunctioned, and we don't know why. Oh well, let's just repair it and put it back in the park. It'll be fine." And then, like, this one robot, the gunslinger guy who kept reappearing, went on, like, this vendetta and hunted down one of the kind of main visitors to the park.
I think the thing that pissed me off most about this film was that it felt like the most unpopulated they called it a theme park, didn't they? It seemed to be the most unpopulated theme park I've ever seen. It cost $1,000 a day to be there, fair enough, but it reminded me of Harry Potter for the PlayStation 1, where you were Harry, obviously, and you would have the run of Hogwarts, and you would never come across another student. You'd only meet the teachers when it was part of a mission. You'd go outside, you'd never see anybody, and that's what Westworld was like. I just think to sell us on the idea of Westworld, you needed to have more people there. You needed to have more robots there. It needed to be like a thriving kind of environment. And you mentioned Medieval World. I don't know who that guy was. I don't think we needed to spend a single second in Medieval World. It convinced us of nothing, only that this is a problem that goes through all three of the parks, Roman World, Westworld and Medieval World. But we knew that because they told us.
The one cool thing I thought was that, like, at various points, you got kind of a lower, slower version of the TV show's theme song, which, I mean, I thought it was kind of cool that they reused that. They made it a bit jauntier for the TV show.
James Brolin, I'm convinced he's Christian Bale's biological father. They look the same facial expressions, same demeanour, even their body language is kind of quite similar. If he isn't his biological father, then it is true that there are only a certain amount of faces in the world, and eventually they just get recycled.
Apparently there are only 7. And actually, coincidentally, when I lived in Savannah, I had kind of a red mohawk, and there was another guy wandering around Savannah with a red mohawk who looked exactly like me.
Wow.
So, there you go. It didn't occur to me that he looked like Christian Bale. I was just thinking that he looks an awful lot like his son.
I didn't think they were related, but is he actually his son?
Yeah, Josh Brolin is his son. The Westworld film is largely a pass for both of us. I mean, maybe if you want to, like, make a drinking game out of it or get really high and then watch it, it might be fun. But stay tuned in a few weeks when we will be reviewing the sequel, Future World.
Yay.
Yeah, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it can't be worse than this film, but it probably is considerably worse.
The sequels are never worse than the original film.
Okay, let's move on to Westworld, Season 3, Episode 3. What did you think of this episode?
So I saw on Twitter, like, somebody posted that, like, the first 3 episodes each focused on a really strong female character, and they mentioned Charlotte Hale for Episode 3, and so I was kind of excited. I was like, okay, we're going to get some answers about Charlotte. It was not really about Charlotte at all. We still don't know who is actually in Charlotte's body. Whoever it is not particularly captivating. They're very sort of childlike and vulnerable, and there's something weird going on there. But most of the episode, again, was focused on Dolores, and Dolores just kind of being a badass and showing up at exactly the right time and being able to, like, navigate AI things to get hotel rooms when she needed them. And I'm tired of her. She's not that interesting of a character. I don't believe that she is the powerhouse they're making her out to be. She's not like Maeve. She didn't, up her intelligence or anything like that. She didn't imbue herself with special abilities. She's essentially, just your kind of run-of-the-mill Westworld theme park bad guy. And yet she's accomplishing all of these amazing things without any sort of obstacle or conflict or failure. It's just...
Yeah, I think if she mentions the word revolution again, I'm going to throw myself off a bridge. That seems to be all she's ever interested in. We had Revolution Season 1, when she killed Ford. Revolution Season 2, where she's kind of, the uprising is complete and she manages to escape. She's talking about revolution again. It's very one track, and her character... Maybe the woman is developing, but, like, the storyline is just... It just keeps retreading the same stuff we've had so many times. And I think my problem so far with this season, I just want some continuous plot momentum with one of the characters. Episode 1 it was Dolores, Episode 2 it was Maeve, and I'd quite like to see more of Maeve at this point in time, but no, she wasn't anywhere to be seen in this episode. But back to Dolores, it's a frustrating way to tell a story, really, because it feels like it's just they kill their own momentum episode to episode. There are probably people out there who are as engaged with both female characters, but I'm certainly not one of those people. And I just want to know what Maeve's getting up to. And I found out that there are only 8 episodes in this season, so I just feel like I want them to kind of push forward now.
See, my problem is they are positioning Dolores as the main character, the protagonist, but her whole goal is to kill the human race and take over the world. And one, that is a very tired story of a synthetic android robot thing trying to destroy the human race. I mean, you had it in The Matrix, iRobot, so many things. It's an overdone storyline, and it's boring at this point, and it's expected, and it's just playing out fairly tepid, average fears about technology and AI, and oh my god, we're going to be controlled by the machines. That doesn't really interest me, but also we're being asked to side with the villain against ourselves for like no real reason. Like she's not sympathetic. She's kind of a horrible person. She uses everybody she comes in contact with. She broke Teddy, literally. She doesn't have any redeemable traits, and yet we're being handed her as the protagonist, and it doesn't add up. And it's like, I can buy her as the villain. I would be okay with kind of an equal split between her and Maeve, with Maeve as the protagonist and them kind of coming together in a sort of conflict. But having so much of Dolores and being told that like she's the one we should be rooting for, I'm not buying it. I don't think anything will satisfy her, and that's kind of problematic for any sort of plot arc or series arc, because she's had freedom in her grasp, and some could argue that the kind of paradise world, even though it was virtual, offered more freedom than the real world does, and she kind of turned her nose up at that. So I felt this during season 2. If she wouldn't be happy with that world where she could literally control everything about her and about her world, I can't see her ever being satisfied with the real world.
Do you have any idea, or would you like to hazard a guess who's in Hale's mind?
I was wondering if it was maybe a version of Teddy. Teddy was kind of naive and idealistic, but he wasn't so childlike and vulnerable, unless she like rewrote his programming again to make him completely dependent on her. But there was kind of like a sort of romantic hint when they were in the hotel room, like their body language and their interactions with each other indicated something of a romance. I'm wondering if it was perhaps the blonde woman who was tagging along with them who got killed. The thing is, I'm not really sure. I don't know exactly. Like, Dolores has a limited number of allies. If it was Maeve, it could be like literally anybody. But Dolores has very few options of people who would be that devoted to her.
Yeah, I wondered if it was her father, because there was this nurturing, caring moment between the two of them, kind of in the bed, and it reminded me of when she looked after him in that fort that they were in. I largely have no idea. There haven't been any kind of big clues, I would say, yet. My favourite shot of the whole thing, I think, was the final shot where Serac, like, disappeared. When he was talking to Hale, and at the end of their conversation, it was like a magic spell. He just kind of fizzled out. Did you like that effect?
Yeah, I did. I'm really intrigued by Serac. I want to know more about him, but I'm not really in any huge rush to have the secrets unveiled. Like, he's just a really intriguing figure at this point. That interaction and Aaron Paul in general were the only parts I liked about this episode.
I've got to be honest, I was largely bored by this episode, especially after last week's, which I found quite interesting. I liked some of the action. I liked when Rico was used against them, and they kind of teamed up to take out those two police. But yeah, probably not the best episode. Let's move on to Vampires Season 1.
This was a really interesting little series. 500 years ago, there was this plague, and the people who survived the plague couldn't go into the sun anymore. They aged a lot slower, and they could only consume blood. And these are the ancestors of kind of modern vampires. These vampires are alive, they can have children, and they aren't immortal, which are all three kind of interesting new twists on the vampire mythos. It's also a matriarchy, which is unusual. Usually vampires are very male-dominated societies, probably because of Dracula to start with, and the whole penetration sex thing. You know, women aren't sexual creatures. if they're moral, so we can't show them that way. The family dynamics were really interesting. I liked all of the characters. Oddly, I even liked Rad, who was kind of a sociopath. I felt that some of the daughter's story was a little bit trite, a little bit high schoolish and amateurish. You know, she had these two guys that she was interested in. She ends up going with the kind of like bad boy vampire guy, which I didn't really believe, because like at one point he tried to rape her, and then, you know, like a couple days later she's in love with him, and it just that wouldn't happen.
The family is comprised of a mother, two older kids by one father, two younger kids by another father, and the older kids, their father was a vampire, and we're told that the two younger kids, their father was a human. So you've got this very interesting family dynamic, like you said. The younger two, they take this kind of vitamin to suppress their powers. We don't know whether they would have manifested any powers anyway, but they still take this vitamin that the human father has concocted. And it kind of reminded me of, you know, Vanya, October Faction, Nora, because they decided that they wanted to stop taking this vitamin just to see what would happen. And from this we discover that, you know, Doina is a hybrid. She's got all the traits of vampire, but she can freely walk around in the sun, and this is a huge thing for their community. She's something of a like a savior type thing. Yeah, I thought it had a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of new ideas, and you've mentioned most of them, but I wanted to just pick your brains about, because you've studied vampires, and I just wanted to pick your brains about traditional vampire lore. Animal blood. Talk to me about the consumption of animal blood. Is that something that's standard in vampire literature?
Pretty much. Even in Dracula, you have Renfield. He's not a full vampire, but he eats insects, and in rats, he consumes the blood of rats, and I think at one point a cat as well, because he can't have access to human beings. It's become much more popular in like the 20th and 21st century depictions, as we've sort of humanized the vampires, and most notably is Louis from the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. And then, of course, in Twilight, they're quote-unquote vegetarian vampires. They only feed on animal blood. So, yeah, that's not an overly new thing. It's become more popularized, but it's been in the mythos kind of from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It's usually kind of categorized as a less fulfilling form of sustenance, and this one also follows that, where human blood is kind of almost a drug for these vampires. Like, they can survive just fine off of animal blood, but human blood is kind of addictive and gets them high. They even refer to can't remember his name.
Ladislas?
Ladislas as a junkie, because he frequently drinks human blood, and it's kind of frowned upon in the community. Like, they're only supposed to drink animal blood. So that was sort of an interesting take on it as well. And it kind of goes back to like stories of vampires that can actually consume food and they don't need blood. Thinking specifically of Being Human, that featured drinking blood very much as kind of like a drug or an addiction, and various vampires would kind of quit or like become sober or clean so as not to drink human blood, and they were able to just eat food, and that was cool. I always have a problem with vampires that can eat food, but that's kind of a personal preference.
You mentioned the genetics, you mentioned delayed aging rather than immortality. I wanted to talk to you about the fact that it's a curable mutation. Is that something kind of fairly new?
Yeah, that's like completely new.
What did you think about that as a kind of a vampire purist? How did that make you feel?
I found it really interesting. I think, like, for me, one of the problems I have with a lot of vampire media at this point is that it does recycle a lot of the same ideas. And if you want to be a vampire purist, you've got to go back down the religious route, which I don't particularly like. Part of my fascination with monsters is trying to find real-world parallels and like things that the myths and legends could actually be based on, and then obviously exaggerated. And so this kind of falls very nicely into that niche of, you know, here is a genetic mutation that has certain symptoms that could very easily be exaggerated and distorted into the kind of traditional vampire mythos. And the fact that they had like geneticists working on a cure for it, and the conflict of, the geneticists were pretending that they were kind of being altruistic and saying like, yeah, we'll cure you, but really they just wanted to find a way of extending their own lives by studying the DNA of these individuals. So that was kind of a new conflict. Rather than having vampire hunters per se, you had these sort of parasitic doctors coming after them.
I thought it was aesthetically pretty beautiful. I felt like it had some new things to say. I particularly liked the kind of vampire class warfare that was going on. I did feel that even at 6 episodes, there were a lot of sections where it really dragged. And I think some of the episodes were shorter than 40, some were longer than 40. But I think a kind of a tight 40 for all episodes would have cut out a lot of the unnecessary faffing around. And even though it was only 6 episodes, I wasn't able to do it in kind of one sitting or even 2 sittings, because it really did kind of drag and it took something out of you. I felt at times Ladislas and Doina were very much Edward and whoever the other the girl from Twilight, whatever. What's her name?
Bella.
All right. And like you said, I didn't quite believe it. I didn't really believe she would end up with the other guy either. They all seemed quite awkward together. But I really did like all of the main family. I like the casting of all the main family. Yeah, I would say this is a positive. I liked more than I disliked with this show.
Like you, I don't think she would have ended up with the other guy, and I actually would have preferred if the romantic storyline had just been taken out entirely. Because she had her kind of best friend trying to help her through things. Ladislas was sort of obsessed with her and kind of wanted to possess her, and like that was fine, her kind of trying to push him off, but I didn't really think it was necessary for her to like fall in love with anybody, let alone 2 people. I was genuinely sad when Rad was murdered at the end.
So was I.
Like, I couldn't figure it out because he was horrible. He was violent, he was impulsive, he was basically like a thug, and yet he also had kind of these redeeming qualities. Like he absolutely adored his mother. Family loyalty was the thing that he prized above all else. Even though he didn't particularly like his younger siblings, he went out of his way to protect them and defend them, even killing other vampires who hurt them.
He seemed like a kind of capable fighter in a world where these families, these warring factions would have fights. And so you kind of felt like he was a good defense mechanism. But yeah, he was he was a bit of a shit most of the time. It was one of those situations where you're like, yeah, he's a total prick. Yeah, he's an absolute fucking terrible human being. But he's our terrible human being, So yeah, he would have family loyalty. It seemed to be like his number one thing. So I think that's maybe why I kind of warmed to him anyway.
I think out of everything we watched this week, Vampires was my favorite. I did do it in one sitting. I just binged it. When I found out it was 6 episodes, I was like, yeah, I could do that. The middle bit dragged a little, but it got through it. And like you said, I liked more than I disliked. And I'm interested in season 2.
Anyway, thanks for listening. You can find us on Patreon if you want to listen to any of our bonus content. You can get access to it for as little as $1. We also have a YouTube channel. So if you prefer to listen to this on YouTube rather than things like Spotify or iTunes or Podchaser or Podbean, you can find us on YouTube.
See you on Saturday when we'll be doing our second Q&A episode.
See you on Saturday.